Now, this week, Donald Trump has been in the dock in Manhattan, facing the first to go to trial of his various criminal indictments. This is perhaps legally, generally agreed that it's legally the weakest of the cases against Donald Trump, of the criminal cases anyway. But it is likely to be the first to be resolved, and probably perhaps, before the election in November, which means that he could be a convicted felon by the time Americans vote on November the 5th. And this is part of a broader pattern internationally where we see increasingly politicians being pursued legally. It's often called lawfare. And I'm delighted to discuss this slightly alarming subject with Lionel Shriver, our great columnist and the author of a new novel that is called Mania. Lionel, what is going on here?
And it's a way of political parties who are often behind these prosecutions, if not persecutions, are trying to win and to get around the voter. And that's certainly going on in the United States. Whatever you think of the individual cases against Trump, the larger package looks like, I'm afraid, what it is, which is the Democratic Party having decided that it doesn't matter how they do it, that Trump is such a danger to the Republic that he needs to be taken down by any means necessary. And, it looks bad. It's like, we can't trust the voter. The voters might make the mistake of voting for a bad person, so we're going to do an end run. The Democrats have tried to take Trump off the ballot, and this is just another means of doing that. One of the things that really disconcerts me, though, in terms of voter perception, is that on the one hand, it's oft observed that every time Trump is prosecuted on one of these cases and he gets a lot of press on it, his support goes up. So, people rally around him. He seems like the underdog. He's being hounded. And so there's that. And then on the other hand, that polls also support that if Trump is ever convicted of anything, that there's a large number of people who wouldn't vote for him. Now, that's completely inconsistent. On the one hand, clearly, people are saying, I don't trust the justice system. It's being misused. This just makes me support him more. And then on the other hand, it's like, I trust the justice system so much that if you get a single conviction, I'm not going to vote for him. In fact, I might have voted for him and then I'm not going to, because that's how much I trust the justice system. So I don't know how to square those statistics.
And in Kate's piece, she talks about how this has come across the Atlantic. And I mean, I think it's been a feature of European politics for longer. And it's been a feature of banana republics ever since there have been banana republics, that, authoritarian figures can use the justice system to get rid of political opponents. But isn't this really the kind of a great flaw in democracy, that the law has to be above democracy to a certain extent? Otherwise, things just don't work.
Well, I mean, one of the favorite truisms in the UK especially is that, no politician can be above the law. And that the trouble is that when that's pursued to an absolute degree, you weaponize the law. Very few of us are perfectly compliant with statute. And I'm not going to tell you in which ways I'm not. But, and most of us get away with it. I am uncomfortable with holding politicians to such a puristic standard that most ordinary voters would not pass that standard. And I'm afraid that the case against Angela Rayner right now is pretty flimsy and petty. My larger concern aside from this whole weaponization that we're talking about, is that when you expect your politicians to basically be perfect, so that you can't find anything in their background or any decision they've ever done, any tax return they've ever filed, they're perfect. Well, who's out there who's that perfect? And essentially you are discouraging people from running for office. It's not worth it because, there's this one little mistake I made. They're going to find it. I'm going to be crucified. And I'm all for holding people to account when they have committed grave errors and grave violations of the law. So yes, politicians should not be above the law. But I really object to petty persecution.
Well, it does seem pretty petty in the case of Angela Rayner, but the problem for her is that she's hoist by her own sanctimonious petard, because she, when Partygate was going on, when Boris was under investigation, she was quite busy saying, how can someone be prime minister? How can someone be in high office when they are under criminal investigation, when they're under police investigation? And of course, now she is under police investigation. And if you ask me, those were both quite petty things, although yes, they pointed towards hypocrisy. And that's what really gets people angry and motivates people to oust people, is the hypocrisy, not the petty tax misfiling or whatever.
Yeah, and the same thing applies to Scotland. I mean, after Alex Salmond was pursued with a case that fell apart on sexual impropriety, then Nicola Sturgeon is also had the police after her, still does. I guess that's not yet resolved, from misuse of funds that were dedicated to the independence referendum. And you have to turn around and say, yeah, she deserves it. I mean, because these are the weapons that she's been wielding, and therefore it's fair game for them to be wielded against her. But this is an ugly spiral. It's really unpleasant to witness. It's kind of gladiatorial, watching them eat each other, and it's an unpleasant spectacle.
And it also feeds into something we talked a lot about, which is polarization and the culture wars to a certain extent, that everybody feels they're on one side. And if somebody else on the other side gets caught doing something, no matter how petty, it's satisfying for that side. And it's very hard for any of us, I think, to not feel that satisfaction, that kind of righteous anger when somebody that we perceive to be on the other side of a political fence, or we've disagreed with about something, is then found out to be, or caught doing something, no matter how petty.
Yes, I mean, both sides, I'm afraid we're living in a time of sides. Both sides they tend to enjoy their gotcha moments. And I think that we need to step back and say, well, let's get a hold of this. Let's have a sense of proportion on both sides, because, it always seems satisfying when your opponent is caught out doing something that perhaps they've been accusing the other side of. And yeah, that's hypocritical. But the whole theater is unpleasant and ultimately counterproductive. And I thought the height of that was, Partygate. Okay, Boris Johnson didn't follow his own rules. And okay, Keir Starmer had a beer and a curry and he wasn't supposed to. Honestly, I didn't care about the cake or the curry. I cared about the rules. I thought that was a situation where we really lost a sense of perspective, because what was wrong was the rules. What was wrong was lockdown and their incredibly petty requirements and the ultimate, gotcha moment, even in relation to ordinary voters. Everyone was supposed to follow these. Oh, you have to order a substantial meal with your pint, or, you're in tier 3 and you can't be in groups of 6. The whole thing was absurd. And that was really a moment to decide, look, these were lunatic rules. They didn't help epidemiologically at all. They did not help contain the virus, and they were an embarrassment. And now look, even our leaders couldn't follow the rules, or wouldn't, or didn't, at least. Let's settle on didn't. So let's do a big mea culpa on the whole regime rather than focusing on the cake and the beer.
It also drags the police into politics in a way that perhaps we haven't really seen before, that the police are now deciding whether or not accusations against a politician might end their career, because they can decide whether or not to launch the investigation. And this puts quite a lot of pressure on a police force that isn't really trained to do politics and shouldn't be.
I agree. I mean, I think it puts the police in an unenviable position. They feel watched, so that, you know, they feel driven to pursue the letter of the law, so that even if there's the tiniest infraction, then they have to go after it. Which again, it doesn't encourage the sense of proportion that I'm suggesting would be far healthier. I don't think legal systems work if you hold everyone to account for the absolute letter of the law in every respect. In fact, I don't think any of us want to live in that society where we wake up every day wondering about, what am I doing wrong and what rule do I have to follow now? And that's essentially a very totalitarian atmosphere, even if it's democratically arrived at. And I don't want politicians to live in that atmosphere any more than I want to live in that atmosphere. And I don't want to hold the police to account to pursue every tiny little infraction. I want the police, as I'm sure most of the people in Britain do, to start going after criminals, real criminals who steal your possessions and break into your house and defraud you or assault you on the street. Let's get to those people, and then maybe we can get around finally to whether or not Angela Rayner declared the wrong address on her electoral form.
And it ties into something a lot of conservatives in Europe talk about, which is the emerging tyranny of the judges. Because the judges are above the police, obviously the court systems are above the police, the justice system is. And this week, Liz Truss got as much mocked. She's being much mocked everywhere at the moment, but she was much mocked for saying she would get rid of the Supreme Court in England. But I mean, that is something a lot of conservatives feel when they look at what's happening with immigration, say, where there is a public appetite for something to be done about immigration. The government comes up with a plan, admittedly it's rather an odd plan, the Rwanda plan, and that is categorically blocked at every turn by a legal system that doesn't seem to want to be willing to let a government do something, pass laws that they have been elected to do and that the public clearly want them to do.
Yes, I mean, I read that Liz Truss piece, and honestly, I agreed with most of it. I would get rid of the Supreme Court, which, you know, it's not some time-honored institution in the UK. It only dates back to Tony Blair, and it's just a naked imitation of the U.S., but the U.S. has a completely different structure of government, and there's no reason to import that idea here. And in general, I think most people understand there is something seriously wrong with the judicial system in the UK, in especial in relation to immigration. And it drives people crazy, so that we have activist lawyers who are usually funded by the government, ironically, and supported by NGOs, which get public money, so that you have the government thwarting itself. The taxpayer is paying so that the government that they elected is unable to institute the policies that they voted for. So, you know, the legal system is completely tied up in knots in relation to immigration. It seems to be virtually impossible to deport anyone from this country. And I'm actually sympathetic with the government on this point, which has been incompetent on any number of fronts. But I believe that the desire to at least check illegal immigration is sincere, and they haven't been able to get anything through. And and even when they do have a policy in place, actually instituting that policy on a granular level, in terms of individuals wanting to into this country, it's just complete paralysis. Nothing happens. You have these flights even previous to the Rwanda policy, all ready to go, and then everyone troops off the plane, and at best you spend £1 million to send one person out of the country. It's an embarrassment, and it's clearly a systemic problem. And I'm not quite sure what the answer is, but I would start by dismantling some of the elements of the court. I'd get rid of the Supreme Court, and of course, I would withdraw from the ECHR.
You mentioned the obviously politicized nature of the American justice system, where you have people who are elected in positions of legal authority, and you have a Supreme Court where presidents nominate the justices to the Supreme Court, and then they're voted on. The justice system is clearly intertwined with the political system in a way that it isn't meant to be here. That said, does it surprise you that it's taken this long for America to get to a situation where political opponents are being so obviously pursued for political reasons in the courts?
I suppose the mechanism has been there all along, and it's been merciful that the legal system hasn't been that weaponized in presidential elections in the way that it is in this one. So that expresses a certain functional restraint. And I would love to go back to that because it makes voters feel out of control, and it has a texture of skullduggery.
Is it because up until quite recently, most people were constrained by a sense of right and wrong as far as the legal system?
Oh, that's so old-fashioned.
Yeah, that's very old-fashioned idea of right and wrong. But I mean, there's always been disgusting skullduggery in politics, but it hasn't been quite so naked as far as the justice system is concerned until now.
Well, one of the things that's going on now is that you have a degree of self-righteousness on the part of the Democratic Party that I think it's at new heights. Democrats have always tended to be a little bit more sanctimonious than Republicans, but now they are really filled with the fires of righteousness. Trump is the Antichrist, and there's no self-questioning on the part of the Democrats. There's no, should we do this, or how does this look? They don't care. They will do anything to keep Trump from being president again. And they believe, it's the secular version of feeling chosen by God. This is an existential moment. We will not have democracy anymore. They genuinely believe that Trump is a demagogue in waiting, that indeed, if he is elected again, he may never leave office, that he will install a dictatorship and take the arms of government and persecute his foes. And therefore, in the service of keeping him from doing that, they are using the arms of government and persecuting their foes. And it's hugely ironic, but I still think it looks bad. I believe that process here is still more important than personality. I would rather live with 4 more years of Trump than see the process of government in the United States completely corrupted. I mean, I think there's a great deal of evidence that the Biden administration has been employing the FBI, the IRS, the tax authority, and the CIA against political opponents. And that, I mean, that kind of corruption has certainly happened very commonly on a lower level, but not so nakedly on a national level.
And that kind of corruption demands, in some ways, an authoritarian response, because, as Donald Trump always says, he must get revenge on the deep state. He must destroy the factions, the institutions, the networks of power that have been trying to destroy him for so long. And a lot of people sympathize with that because the system is obviously corrupt. And the only way to counter it is through some degree of authoritarianism. So it creates the very thing that it's pretending to.
Well, the Democrats are acting in an authoritarian way, and they are setting the precedent. If Trump were to get back into the presidency, they have already set the precedent for weaponizing these institutions, for weaponizing the State Department to go after one's enemies. They've already done it in the same way that they set the precedent for questioning the results of a presidential election. I mean, in 2016, Hillary rejected Trump's election as, quote, illegitimate. And therefore, Trump did the same thing in 2020. The Democrats got there first.
I think there, Lionel, just to end on this now, I think there I picked up that you were saying you'd rather have 4 more years of Trump than 4 more years of what the Democrats are doing. Is that right?
I want to see the institution of the U.S. federal government preserved with some integrity. And if that's at the price of 4 more years of Trump, which I couldn't be less enthusiastic about, then that's a price worth paying. The process of a relatively just American government that obeys the rules, at least roughly, is more important to preserve than which party is in power, however temporarily. And that's what's upsetting me on the Democratic side, that they are willing to throw out the principles of democracy in order to save democracy. And I don't believe that works.
On that note, we'll end it. Thank you very much, Lionel Shriver, for coming on to Spectator TV.